I think it's fair to say at this point that Hollywood has fired its biggest guns and missed the mark by a long mile. One of the lowest grossing summer seasons of all time, the pandemic era not included, of course, but back then at least there was a solid reason why the films couldn't make any money. Theaters were shut tight, there was a total lockdown, and even if they wanted to go to the cinemas, people had to stay put. And even during that tumultuous summer, one Chinese film made more money than Fantastic Four seems like it'll generate in its entire theatrical run. So now the question is it finally happening? Is the reckoning of Hollywood finally here? Because four mega budgeted, highly anticipated. What? Well, I'm not the one saying that, IMDb is. But there were four big ones between June and now, all of whose budgets were close to or north of $200 million. And guess what? There's not $1 billion gross between them. Which begs the question, what's happening? Why on God's green earth are people just not showing up? Because most of the four films, in terms of sheer quality, were not bad at all. Heck, it was even pretty good and spectacular at certain points, and yet the box office pull seems to be shockingly absent. Let's start with the most anticipated. Once again, it's not me, it's IMDb saying this, but let's talk about Superman. The film dubbed as the quote-unquote next big thing, which was supposed to launch DC's decade-long planned universe. Well, there's a lot of people looking at this in a very optimistic way. Comparisons to Man of Steel's box office aside, one thing is for sure, it was pretty much a financial disaster. I've seen a ton of comments stating that it was DC or James Gunn's plan to win the trust of the audiences first with the pilot film, to undo some of the damage that the now extinct Snyderverse did during its run, so that the new timeline and a fan base for the fresh DC universe could be established. I even told you that the Superman movie can afford to fail after the corporate split of WBD, which gave them a short runway but an abysmal 560 million gross. And after an entire month of screening, that's alarming. Because even though some people, for reasons unknown, assumed that the break-even point for the film is 600 million, the reality is that it's between 800 and 900 million dollars. For all the people that don't understand the economics of how that works, I'll be making a video shortly explaining the whole damn thing, but these are the facts. So with a month in and just 560 million under its belt, Superman is looking to fall short, about 250 million short of the break-even point. Not a profit, not a blockbuster verdict, just the break-even point. And that's supposed to launch a whole cinematic universe? Well, good luck, Gunn. There's also another bunch of misinformed people who argue that Iron Man and Man of Steel opened to same numbers, conveniently forgetting two facts. First, that Iron Man released like 17 years ago, at a time when the genre was just beginning to rise to new heights, and the film itself is a masterpiece. Not an okayish film that you'll see and forget in a week, but a truly brilliant origin story with enough gravitas to make people actually give a f***. And second, that Man of Steel came out 12 years ago and gave DCEU a unique identity at a time when everyone wanted to be the next Marvel, so good or bad, it doesn't matter, because the film still stood out as a fresh product. And this wasn't during a decline either. If anything, the film came out at a peak when people were swarming into the cinemas to watch their caped idols do their thing, which in turn led to DC fans blindly supporting their brand against an opposition that was clearly winning. Whereas Superman has neither of the aforementioned advantages and is still fighting an uphill battle while trying to be second-hand Marvel, as the real one itself is barely holding on. And it's during an era where OTT has taken over a big chunk of the market and people just don't want to buy tickets anymore. Think about it, why has a movie with so much hype going on for it, with a marketing campaign that a filmmaker could only dream of, gross lesser money while having a nearly 60% increase in ticket prices compared to Man of Steel? And to add insult to injury, this is Superman we are talking about. Not some B-tier no-name hero or a newly established character with only a few years or so of history and fandom, but a character with nearly 9 decades of narrative build-up who's also considered to be the poster boy for the entire brand. So if people aren't paying to watch Supes, does James Gunn really think that there'll be any fan interest for Supergirl, the Authority or Swamp f***ing thing? But it looks like only the Cape Crusader can give them a much needed hit at this point. But with the developmental hell that Matt Reeves' Batman Part 2 seems to be stuck in, after as amazing as it was, I don't know if people would be willing to go watch a totally different version of the same character just yet, without Reeves' story concluding. But it's still a much safer bet than this pile of shit. So Superman was a dud. Speaking of duds, there's Fantastic Four. It was supposed to be the revival of Marvel, the film that made people care again, and it did do that to some degree, but Fantastic Four did one more thing, which was bring the facts to light. People are over Marvel. Because even though it opened to pretty much similar numbers as Superman, there was a rather unexpected 80% drop in ticket sales in just the second week. The film itself is great. In fact, I felt it was one of the best superhero origin films in recent memory. But my god, the tickets are just not selling, are they? I didn't expect it to soar to the $1 billion mark, but not even 500 mil. This lays bare the fact that the Marvel brand is severely damaged, which even the biggest fans of the franchise have to agree to after seeing the collections of the previous 3 films. The fact of the matter is that the hardcore fans are the only ones still showing up and the casual audiences are just nowhere to be found. And it's not like they're watching anything else either. A big chunk of the crowd has just opted to stay away from the cinemas because none of the films are really making any money. To put that into perspective, this is how bad it's gotten. The combined box office collection of all 3 Marvel releases this year will still fall about 100 million short of Deadpool and Wolverine's total gross, which released just last year. 1 versus 3 and the 3 still lose. No wonder they've already kicked Pedro to the curb and are apparently looking to put Hemsworth front and center as the protagonist of Avengers Doomsday. And now for the most disgustingly formulaic film that came this season, Jurassic World Rebirth. Yeah, I watched it, but chose to not drop a review because I put out a video just one day out from the release and pretty much everything I said there is exactly what came to pass. It's true that the film was the highest grosser among the 4, but it was definitely the worst of the lot, and by a significant margin. A generic VFX heavy sci-fi monster film that checks all the boxes of a typical Hollywood film in the modern era, which manages to deteriorate the franchise a good bit more while making just enough money for the studio to greenlight a totally unasked for trilogy, which will eventually lead to the death of the franchise itself. The only thing going on for the movie is that the international audiences are still somehow interested in the idea of dinosaurs, but looking at the steadily declining quality and sales trajectory, I'd give the series one more film before it reaches Marvel levels of insignificant, which means that's not any kind of a win. And with another hefty 200 million plus price tag and about 125 million spent on marketing, we're looking at a break-even point which seems to be in the ballpark of 800 to 900 million. So even the highest grossing film this summer is looking like it'll barely break even, if at all. And now for the movie with the least anticipation, but the one that turned out to fare better than even the studio itself expected it to, which was the F1 film. The story of a motorsport maniac who was obsessed with the thrill of racing, which made an unexpected 558 million, and it still seems to be doing relatively well at the cinemas, even after a month and a half of its release. An Apple original film which has now put the studio on the map as a serious contender, but with a production budget between 200 to 300 million, the film will still lose a ton of money. It's not exactly a loss for Apple though, because the company is bound to make the money back through other channels, but as good as the movie was, it should have made even more money. The film is also Brad Pitt's highest grossing one, which almost seems crazy because he's one of the biggest and most recognizable stars on the planet, but I only just realized that he's never had a $1 billion film in his entire career. So the moral of the story is that no matter how good the film, the word of mouth, the marketing, or even the eventual box office gross got, things are just not what they used to be for Tinseltown. The whole idea of a brand, element of spectacle, a star, rave reviews, or great word of mouth compelling audiences to visit their local theater to watch a film is just not working anymore. Which then brings us to the scary part, because that's all there is for a film to succeed. The norm until now was that people would go watch a film if at least one of the aforementioned aspects was present, which usually causes a snowball effect, which would drive more and more audiences to the theaters. But now it looks like every single tried and tested trope has failed, every idea has been rehashed to death, and the only thing that the industry seems like it could do right now is bring back legitimate creativity while understanding what actually drives the audiences to a cinema hall, and not do the exact opposite and hopefully do all of that before it's too f***ing late. Well, that's gonna be it for today, folks. I'm gonna go eat some strawberries.